Moving countries can be one of the most exciting and most challenging things you'll ever do. And we're here to take one big worry off your plate: your taxes. At Expat Taxes, we understand the complexities of Irish tax from your perspective as an expat and tailor our advice to your needs. With decades of expertise, our team at Expat Taxes will help you navigate tax residency, cross-border taxation, reliefs and returns, and will work with your country's tax advisor to make sure your taxes are sorted. Whether you're an individual or a corporation coming from Australia, the United States, the UK, or anywhere in the world, we want to help you. So visit us at expattaxes.ie to book a consultation today, and let's make moving to Ireland easier together.
Welcome to Tax Bites for Expats, the top tax tips you want to know as an expat. The podcast is here to help answer the common queries and concerns expats have when moving to or from Ireland. Complex taxes explained simply. We'll focus on the Irish and international tax issues to be aware of to ensure you save time, money and stress.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Wickham from expatttaxes.ie. You're listening to the Tax Bites for Expats podcast, the show that explains the do's and don'ts of income taxes for people who are moving to or from Ireland. So today we are talking to John Lee of Work From Anywhere, and just to do a brief intro before we introduce John. We're very delighted to have him with us. He is a chartered accountant who trained with Deloitte. He has been to Smurfit and has a fantastic career behind him, where he worked for many years as a senior finance leader for CRH, and is now working with his second startup, Work From Anywhere, which is essentially a platform to help companies figure out how to hire or work from anywhere. So thank you very much, John, for joining us today. And I'm sure you'll be able to tell us some more interesting details about your background above and beyond what I've just summarised quickly.
Well, look, thanks very much, Stephanie. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I've had an interesting journey. I think 15-year career, 10 years in the corporate world, 5 years in the startup world, and then 3 kids below 5 in the middle of it all as well. So it's been a very interesting journey. But thanks for having me here today. Nice to be on.
Oh no, we're delighted to have you. Yeah, 3 kids below below 5. You said you've been busy aside from all your business ventures.
Exactly. This week we had the youngest of Barra. He's 1 and he started full-time creche. So it's been a week of bottle opening of champagnes and all the rest of it. It's been for myself and Dee. It's been good. I know it's good. They're settling in well, thankfully.
Good. Yeah, because you guys made the move to Portugal not that long ago, really. So you've had a lot of change ongoing.
Yeah, there's nothing as constant as change, is there? So yeah, I actually trained in Deloitte back in the day, obviously during the financial crisis. So that was a turbulent couple of years. Then moved to CRH up to the Belgrade office, and then went over to the Netherlands and started off a financial controller role over there. CRH is a very decentralized business, so there wasn't a huge amount of expats at the time. But it was a great experience. Absolutely loved it. Spent a number of years over there. That's where I met my wife Dee in an Irish pub of all places. No surprise there. But then we quickly kind of embarked on a big adventure. Pretty quickly she started Culture Me, and I joined her in that, which was basically a startup to help companies navigate different cultures. And we used that as an opportunity to travel the world with our daughter Rosa. So by the time Rosa, she's 5 years of age now, she's been to 25 countries. So that's been an interesting journey. We spent 6 months living in Thailand and then came back to Ireland for the pandemic. And then literally what happened is the owners of the house we were renting, they basically said they wanted to move back in, which was fine. And we tried looking at other places to live in Cork and Galway and Dublin. But what became clear very, very quickly is we looked at it as an opportunity to look at moving abroad again. So put together a database of every country in the world, and essentially Portugal came up very, very high in the list. And literally by the beginning of March, we've moved here, and already I have to say we've settled in great. Obviously missed the family back home, but we're really loving Portugal so far.
And I suppose if you'd been to Thailand, you'd experienced living away from Ireland, and particularly with a young family. When you were looking at Portugal, Was the fact that it was closer to Ireland kind of one of the factors? In other words, you can jump on a flight and come back if you need to, or what was the driving, like what drove that decision ultimately?
Yeah, it was certainly one of the factors. So when we put together this database, we looked at, for example, places on Nomad List is a really good source for digital nomads of best places to go. We looked at CEO World, best place to raise a kid. We looked at the risk by country, the average temperature, healthcare, infrastructure, cost of living, as well as obviously the tax side of it as well. And I have to say, I mean, for us, Portugal comes up quite frequently on the best places to remote work in the world. And when you get over here, I mean, it's very, very easy to see why. I mean, for us, it's a great education system, and we can already see it from how quickly the kids are settling in. Also, as well, it's interesting, from my previous startup being an intercultural startup, you can see how different countries look and treat kids differently and look at family life very, very differently. And certainly, Thailand and Portugal are two countries where they are great at dealing with kids. I'll give you an example when we were in Thailand. I mean, I'm not very a hugely emotional guy, but I mean, I did cry. I literally cried the last day we picked Rose up from the creche in Thailand. Such was the generosity and love they shared there. They'd literally take the kids while you're in a restaurant. They'd take Rosa and they'd go and play with her for like 20 minutes, half an hour while you're having a meal. Like you don't get that in a huge amount of countries, but certainly in countries that are highly orientated towards families and kids, you do get that. And again, Portugal is quite similar in that respect.
And that's actually a really interesting point, because when you kind of think about moving, to a location, we can tend to focus on kind of hard things that are easily measured, like, a tax rate or, kind of what salary we're going to get or what rent we're going to pay. But the reality is it's the day-to-day interactions with the people who you're living close to is what also goes towards your actual life experience and the quality of your life. And interestingly, I think as well, when I think of a family moving to a location like Portugal, probably one of the things I would think would be difficult would be the language. I mean, as a family, how do you navigate that when, obviously I assume none of you speak Portuguese yet?
Yeah, well, for us, it was, for us, we're very passionate about trying to integrate in with the local culture. I mean, for me, I speak 6 languages, 4 of them fluently. So Portuguese will be my 7th. And it's a big part of my own value set to try and integrate in with the local culture as best we can. And so it was actually quite interesting trying to pick out a school. So, typically you've got a choice between a local school or like an expat school. And for us, we managed to find this hybrid school in between, a school called Aprendices. And so what they do is led by Portuguese. They speak mostly Portuguese, like 80% Portuguese in the school, 20% English. Very big in Portuguese culture. Even the way they teach, for example, kids, at a young age, they don't get homework. So they follow some of the Nordic principles of education from that perspective. It's quite interesting. And so, but they're actually on the international stream. So they're on the international stream, so you can, if you had to move abroad, you could still stick on that international stream. So that was hugely attractive. So you're getting the best of the language, the culture, and we're already seeing it now. Rose and Esme, they're already speaking the language. They're like sponges at this age. So that for us was a big benefit.
Yeah, unbelievable. That's amazing. And in terms of then of, to kind of mention your point about culture, how do you find integrating like locally? Do you find yourself kind of drifting towards the local Irish population, or is it really about throwing yourself in and just like, right, well, we're here now, we're going to make friends with, the locals?
Well, yeah, for me, I've found a kind of a formula that works very, very well for me. I mean, for me, it's critical to avoid going into the habits of getting stuck in the Irish pubs or just following around the Irish community, even though we actually have a lovely bunch of Irish friends here already. But for us, we try and mix it with the locals, try and learn the language. You pick a really favourite hobby that you love. Like for us, we love tennis, or it might be, for example, rugby when I was in the Netherlands. I joined the local rugby team. I made sure not to pick an expat rugby team. I made to pick one that was very much filled with a lot of locals. And so they all mostly spoke Dutch. It was a great opportunity to learn the language as well. And that helped me integrate. I was playing a sport that I love. I was getting my exercise, and I was also kind of integrating with the local culture and learning the language. So, all those things combined, they're very, very important aspects of us, of trying to do what we can to integrate in with the local culture. And I have to say, the locals here, they're lovely. They're really lovely to deal with. They're very relaxed. It's a kind of that lovely mix between Northern and Southern Europe, I would say, would be my experience so far.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really worked for you guys. So I suppose, we probably have people listening today, and I know I, daily speak to people who for whatever reason, have in the main decided to kind of come back to Ireland to work remotely for an employer, usually a UK-based employer or a US employer. But, we also have a large cohort of people who are living in Ireland and working remotely for an Australian employer who, the time zone there can cause a challenge. But the key is it's becoming much more common. And what you're doing as a family and also what your business is doing is just so much more topical post-COVID. So, I'm interested, and I'm sure our listeners are, to understand a bit more about, what are the tax and compliance issues that you are, obviously expert on, in terms of if someone wants to do this, what do they need to think about?
Well, the first thing about it depends if you're looking for an individual or from a company perspective. But from a company perspective, the first thing is just to take a look at your people funnel. There's a lot of companies that are losing good candidates in their recruitment funnel because they don't have a work from anywhere policy, for example, or a remote work policy of some sort. Likewise, there's people that might be disengaged or not as productive as they can be, or not happy, having low employee NPS scores because they don't have some kind of location flexibility. And lastly, then as a result, then having high attrition because you don't have it in place. So let me give you some tangible numbers here. Airbnb, when they announced their work from anywhere policy in May, their careers page went from 400,000 to over 800,000 in the space of a month. So It doubled. Yeah, Spotify, a year after they announced their work from anywhere policy, they announced their results. There's two of the key features of it. They reduced their attrition by 15%. They also significantly boosted their diversity inclusion. So, there's some tangible reasons why, and don't get me wrong, work from anywhere is a misnomer. You can't work from anywhere you want, precisely because of these challenges around tax, employment law, and others. But you certainly can allow some countries or some states, for example, in the US, you can have some flexibility. So figuring that out is absolutely critical. If you look at the risks, yes, there's no doubt there are certainly a multitude of different risks. But again, it's about, what I often say to companies, whether you're looking to hire from anywhere or whether you're looking to work from anywhere, you've got to first of all start with, what's right for you and your business. Where do you plan on expanding in the future? What countries, do you want to either hire a lot more people from in the future? What's your plans for what your own employees want? Do you have I give an example. Gran Canaria, they have a ZEC regime that has a corporation tax rate of, if I'm not mistaken, 5%. So you can actually potentially open up a branch or a legal entity there, allow your employees the ability to remote work in one of the best remote work spots in the world, and also reduce your exposure from a corporation tax perspective. So some of these are risks you need to run away from, some of them you can run towards from. But if you like, I can kind of go through, Stephanie, some of the key risks to watch out for.
Yeah, please do. Definitely, please do.
So I guess if you look at it, you've got the tax and employment law ones are clearly going to be very, very big ones. If we try and break out, there's more than that though. But if we look at it, the first one to start with is on the payroll tax side. Both for an person as an individual, become potentially individually tax resident, depending on the number of days they spend there. But actually, even sooner than that, the payroll tax triggers from an employer. So you can have some countries that even after a day, a company might have a payroll tax withholding or reporting obligation. And so that can be quite tricky. Same thing for Social Security as well. The triggers can be different for Social Security. But I think with Social Security, if you're working from one country to another, in some countries the Social Security rate can be 0%, and some countries it can be, like in France, nearly 45%. There can be like a massive difference in the triggers and also the amount of rates that you can have for Social Security in particular. You then have also corporation tax. So let's say somebody, for example, becomes individually tax resident and we haven't done it correctly as a company for that one person. You can run into some fines for that and pay some back taxes and whatnot. But your risk in a lot of cases will be reasonably limited to that one person. But if you take, for example, corporation tax, if somebody triggers what's called permanent establishment, so let's say you have somebody in a senior role or in a sales rendering role that remote works abroad for a period of time and they're doing high risk activities like in sales. If they trigger permanent establishment, you'll have this corporation tax risk. So basically, let's say somebody's generating let's keep a very simple example. Let's say somebody's generating $2 million worth of sales and the corporation tax rate of the country they're working in remotely is at 30%. There's a potential risk that you may have 30% by the 2 million. As a risk, which is 600k of potential risk if you haven't done your research. So understanding that side of it can be very, very tricky, and of course it varies from country to country how they look at that. You've also got visa as well. Visa can be a very, very important one. as well. So if you're working in a country for a period of time and you haven't declared that properly to the authorities, you've gone in on a tourist visa, well, then you're not using the correct visa. So the difficulty for a company there is that they may potentially ban you from ever hiring or working in that country again in future for a period of time. So, as well as actual monetary fines. So there can be, in some cases, for some of these risks, it can be just a fine. In other cases, it can be criminal penalties. So you really need to understand the differences and all that. And of course, there are other, risks beyond that as well, like insurance or duty of care. What happens if somebody gets injured? Or also data privacy and security, IP. There are a ton of other risks, but the bottom line is, I guess the message I'm trying to give is that there are ways you can narrow down these risks, be in control of them, and as long as you're careful of the countries that you're going into and understand the local legislation and tax laws and whatnot, I think you've got at least some chance of handling it. And the other side of it is that it depends on your company, because your company, a manufacturing company, this will never really work. But if you are in the battle of talent for software engineers, it's a different ballgame. So I think the cost of not doing anything can be a big risk as well. So it's trying to balance the opportunities with the benefits, I guess.
And I think you raise a really interesting point there, because, my own background would be one where I've kind of worked in a commercial role, and you see, different departments within an organization, and there's different drivers, there's different KPIs. So, for example, you're talking to a HR manager who's telling you they can't resource, the company. And then you're also talking to a finance director who's telling you why he doesn't want a PE in a location. So I think it really is an education piece. And have you seen that, and you alluded to it earlier, that companies are becoming more savvy, that they kind of have to come to this party if they want to be able to get the people that they need?
Well, yeah, 100%, Stephanie. I mean, the big thing is, there's no doubt about it, some of these risks really are, just non-negotiable. I mean, somebody creating a permanent establishment in France, forget it. It's just, I'm sorry, we're just not going to entertain it. So there's certain countries that you have to really, really watch out for a particular type of roles and whatnot. But that's the whole point of having a kind of a work or a hire from anywhere policy. Some of the best examples of this, I like, for example, Hopin. We had the head of global mobility for Hopin join us last week, Imelda Keane. She's been a great addition. But in Hopin, for example, they made clear when they put out a job on the jobs boards, they made clear, okay, which are the countries that we're going to allow this from? So if you're in country A, B, C, you're going to be hired as an employee in a legal entity. In these other countries, you're going to be hired, for example, via an employer of record. And these other countries, you're going to be hired as a contractor. And by the way, we don't hire outside of that. So that's a tremendous benefit for job seekers. They can see from the get-go what countries do they hire from, what the model is. And so that if somebody's applying from outside those countries, they'll know not to apply. So I think that's where we need to get from the hire from anywhere piece. Likewise, on the work from anywhere, companies need to make more transparent in their jobs boards, in their careers pages. What is your work from anywhere policy? How long is the maximum you'll allow somebody to work remotely abroad for example, and how do you approach it? And so I think the worst is when companies don't make that clear. Or simply put their head in the sand. I mean, putting your head in the sand. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of companies who we've talked to in the last year that were quite defensive and risk averse a year ago, and have actually seen a significant amount of talent leakage in the meantime. And unfortunately, it's too late now. You've lost a lot of talent. You've got to rebuild up your talent pipeline again. You might have lost some critical roles. So I think it's important to do that risk assessment to see what is right for your company and your culture. It might not be right for everyone, but I think for those companies that are in the battle for remote work talent, I think it is something you need to consider.
And I think, I would definitely think that that's a really valid point, because essentially what you're saying is don't be reactive. Don't react to people leaving the company because they're not happy that you haven't got this. And also the other point I would make there is, don't be reactive in terms of allowing each request that comes through the door, because bear in mind, ultimately there may be a cohort of people within the organisation who want to live and work outside of the country they're employed in for whatever reason. Have a policy so that you're not necessarily having to jump through the hoops every time a request comes, and there's a specific protocol to kind of analyse whether or not one request is doable or not.
Yeah, and I think that also comes down to the advisors and the technology piece as well. I mean, having good advisors who are familiar in the space that can help give you some pointers, as well as the technology piece. I mean, a Fortune 500 company, is going to need a very sophisticated technology tool set to be able to automate a lot of this. for example, and integrate in with their policy. Whereas maybe a smaller, mid-sized company will need something less. We're seeing a lot of companies that are just using simply Excel, to be honest. But I think the problem is that pre-pandemic, this was mostly focused. The biggest risks were around expats, and we didn't have a huge amount of them. We did have business travelers with some components of risk, but the major one was around expats, and we didn't have a huge population. When I was in CRH, I was an expat. There probably wasn't more than 100 expats in all of CRH at the time, and they had about 80,000 employees. So the difference now is that you have a lot more people requesting work from anywhere. If we look at, for example, some numbers behind this, American Airlines, in their most recent investor update that they had, I think it was back in, it was April or May, they basically said that pre-pandemic, 20 to 25% of their travel was mixed, as in mixed between leisure and business, whereas now it's between 50 and 55%. So most of their travel is workation. Now, don't get me wrong, the primary focus or purpose is probably still business or leisure. But the point being, somebody going on a week-long business trip, they'll tag on a few days of leisure, or somebody going on a leisure trip for a week or two, they'll tag on a week or two of business and working from that destination.
And that's obviously like a lagging report. In other words, it's probably it's looked back at the last 12 months. Now that I read an article yesterday on BBC, and it's talking about employers are hoping now there's going to be this return to the office now that we're coming into the colder months. And I suppose from an Irish perspective, employees are probably happy to go in and let somebody else pay their heating bill. But do you think, or what do you see in the market happening now that we are kind of, COVID seems like it's a distant memory? Do you think this is set to continue?
Well, it is, and actually, I mean, if you look at, for example, the last 5 years, if you look at, for example, Google Trends is a good one to look at here. And for Google Trends, if you look at the search term workation or work from anywhere, you can see how that's absolutely increasing out the gate. Another one, that's on the work from anywhere piece. The other one, for example, is remote work jobs. If you look at the search term on Google Trends globally for the last 5 years, remote work jobs, I mean, that is only increasing. It's only continuing to increase. It's like a hockey stick. So you've got to remember, we did remote work in the pandemic, which wasn't really true remote work. And companies now are beginning to figure out, they're beginning to look at the tools and the approaches and the processes and how they manage people and get the best out of them. They're starting to learn better how to leverage remote work. But we're at the early stages of this. It's like when Ford it came along with the assembly lines back in the 20s. It took a lot of companies around the world to 10, 20, 30 years to follow that and learn how to make the best of that. And it's the same thing with remote work. This is yes, people have been remote working for years before the pandemic, but it's really only accelerated in the last couple of years. And certainly from the demand side, this is a value shift from employees. For me, with Barra, my youngest, coming in, opening the door when I'm working at home, and seeing him walk for the first time, or him coming up to give me a hug. I mean, I can't replace that. You cannot replace. No office will replace that. And don't get me wrong, there will be companies that will have a great in-office experience. But for me, being close to family like that, for me, that's irreplaceable. So I do think this is something that is not going away, and that's what we're hearing from the market and from different companies.
And I think more coming at it from purely the tax perspective, and specifically from the Irish tax perspective. I think the experience we see is the fact that the tax offices haven't designed their processes and procedures to deal with it either. And a lot of the documents that are talking about somebody coming to Ireland to work on a foreign employment contract, they always allude to this expat assignment scenario in the majority of cases. And the reality is, like you said, that is few and far between now. A lot of what we see is exactly these employee initiated, or, an employer saying, well, I need this talent, where is the person? I would say you're on the money. In other words, by the time the processes and the tax offices are up to speed, we are probably looking at 3 to 5 years before we start to get systems that are designed to cope with this kind of fluid work arrangement, where somebody may be working from 2 locations or 3 locations in a given tax year. Well,
100%. I mean, this is a really, really tricky one. Even these big companies around the world are struggling with this now at the moment. And I mean, governments are working on this. The European Commission, for example, they're looking at a teleworking policy to put in place that people could work remotely abroad for up to 96 days. That's a threshold they're looking at now at the moment, which does make a ton of sense. You'll get a lot of people that do want to avail the freedom of movement and want to work remotely in a different country and tag on vacation or whatnot. And you don't want to have to trigger massive, administrative burdens for people. And the other side of it is that working remotely abroad can really boost tourism in different countries as well. So it's a very, very tricky one, because technically the way the tax legislation is written in a lot of countries right now, people only working literally a couple of days or weeks could trigger all sorts of really serious risks. So, and the other side of it is that if you look at, for example, a lot of countries that are losing a tax base abroad because people now were, let's say, working remotely, let's say we're working in the UK and now decided to work remotely back home in Spain with their family or whatnot, and you're finding they're losing tax base, but then how do they compensate? Because what's happening now in the meantime is remote workers are coming to the UK and they're actually, in some cases, not declaring that they've triggered residency, or the fact that they're working there. And so what the UK, for example, and this is just one example of many, are doing, they're setting up cross-departmental task forces, with HMRC, with immigration and whatnot, to try and go after these remote workers that are not declaring it. So I think it's also a risk on the employee and the company side as well. And the biggest risk, to be honest, for the case of Ireland is that our marginal tax rates are very, very high. I mean, they are very, very high. They're in the top 20 in the world. So the challenge for us as a country is that, yes, we have a very competitive corporation tax rate, but probably what will maybe potentially need to happen in the future is we'll need to rebalance it a little bit. That at the moment it's extremely high individual income tax rate and a low corporation tax rate. We'll probably need to raise the corporation tax a little bit and reduce the individual tax rate, or at least find some way of attracting either the remote workers or people in that space that want to come work remotely in Ireland for a period of time. So it's a very tricky one.
Yeah, I think you're really right. Some brilliant stats there, John. Yeah, you've just got such an amazing insight, and I think very specific knowledge in an area that has kind of ballooned in the last couple of years, and that there isn't anybody doing the type of work you're doing. So we really appreciate you coming on to talk to us. Look, I think we'll have to arrange another chat because there's just so many more topics we can talk about. But yeah, it's been fantastic to talk with you.
Well, I'd like to just give a shout out to a couple of companies that are doing great work in this space. People like Grow Remote, they're doing great. They're a great resource for anyone interested in learning more about work in general. Employers of record interesting. You've got Boundless in Ireland. There's many more as well globally. Rowena Hennigan is abroad, but she's from Ireland. She's a great thought leader in the space, one of the top 20 LinkedIn influencers. So there's a lot to be proud of companies in Ireland in the space, as well as Hubley is another one as well, a co-workspace company. There's a lot of really proud, let's say Ireland is becoming a little bit of almost a mini Silicon Valley of remote work startups. So keep an eye out. It's going to be very interesting next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, John. We'll have to do this again soon.
It was a pleasure. Thanks very much, Stephanie. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Tax Bites for Expats. Please do leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast. And as always, remember to take professional tax advice specific to your personal circumstances before acting or refraining from action in connection with the matters dealt with in this series. The material in this podcast is intended to give general guidance only.